Now, we've just had the formal opening of Budget Week here in the nation's capital, and the results are absolutely appalling. We've had the fascist Republican budget from the House of Representatives, and I say fascist with studied care. These are not gratuitous insults. These are scientific terms of description, taxonomy, classifications. Earlier in the week, we had the House of Representatives pass a budget monstrosity by 228 to 199. And then after that, we've just had the Senate pass a similar budget, not identical, but similar and converging in the same direction. That was done late on in the evening, late at night, actually, between Friday and between Thursday and Friday. So with the 26th to the 27th of March. There's only one way to put it. The Republicans who voted for these measures are fascists, and they are savages. Maybe we can call them fascist savages. Their budgets are no budgets. They are manifestos of murder. They are, in a very real sense, a ticket to a civil war, to the breakdown of civilization as we've known it. This is class war by the tools and minions of the Koch brothers. And the scoring on this budget, if the Congressional Budget Office, CBO, is going to come and do scoring, they better do the scoring in mega deaths. You will recall the ingenious movie Dr. Strangelove by Stanley Kubrick and a great cast in 1964, right after the Cuban Missile Crisis, when people were thinking about this. And you remember that famous scene in the war room of the Pentagon where General Buck Turgidson of the Air Force, who is an advocate of preemptive nuclear war, has a notebook in his lap, or a loose leaf book, that says world targets in megadeaths. And I would suspect that from now on you're going to have Republican congressional aides, and indeed senators and congressmen, come forward carrying similar loose leaf notebooks. Budget parameters in megadeaths. It is the only way to put it. We've been studying the bloody butcher's bill of the Republican hegemony here for the last several weeks. You remember it's 17,000 dead or dying as a result of the refusal of 36 reactionary Republican states to even provide this minimal Obamacare, right? A token plan, but at least something. 17,000 dead there. And now if the Supremes, with the fascist Justice Scalia, impeach Scalia, of course, it's another 10,000. So you're up to about 27,000. But now all of that has now been far exceeded. Here's what we look at now. With some of this we reported last week, but let's give it a summation here. First of all, on food stamps, perhaps the most important of these entitlements in terms of immediate life or death impact, right? You got 50 million people, or almost 50 million people, who've got to have dinner tonight. They got to have breakfast tomorrow morning, and on and on. They've actually got to have 3 square meals a day, and if you take that away, then some of them are going to die. Well, the proposal is a significant cut of the food stamp budget. At the same time, in addition to savage cuts in food stamps, and I'm not able to provide numbers on this because in many cases the numbers are not provided. You've sort of got to figure them out. Remember, this is the authorization phase of the budget, right? It's not actually appropriating money It's establishing the parameters, right? The general magnitudes into which the appropriations bills must flirt, right? Peculiarity of the U.S. system. Everything has got to be authorized, and then it's got to be appropriated. We're now in the authorization phase. That does not mean, as the rotten controlled media are arguing, that these votes mean nothing. No, they mean a lot. They mean a great deal. And one of the reasons I want to go into this in detail is that the media coverage of this monstrosity is designed to keep you quiet, right? To keep you essentially passive and gulled and duped until it's time to go into that bad night of Republican, fascist, genocidal austerity. The media is covering up the descent into fascism, be it the union-busting laws in Wisconsin or in Indiana or in Michigan and similar nefarious activities. So food stamps cut at the federal level, and then it will be essentially farmed out to the states in the form of block grants. As far as Obamacare goes, completely repealed, and there is no substitute. There's nothing that fills the gap. So that is now something like 14 million Americans who will be simply stripped of their health care, and that's it. You're out of luck. You're on your own. In the case of Medicare, the authorization builds in the what the Republicans call premium support. Premium support means a voucher that within a certain number of years, they say in the 8th year of this wonderful plan, you will stop getting an actual Medicare card that you can use to buy coverage as needed. It will be in the form of a voucher, and the voucher will have a number on it, and that will say your allowance for this year is $5,000. And if that's not enough, tough luck, drop dead. You will die. That's it. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. So it means that the entitlement, the essential human right, which is widely recognized in the world and would have been recognized in the U.S. Constitution if Roosevelt had lived. Remember, he put this right along with other rights into the State of the Union message of 1944. Medicare will essentially be put on the path to destruction. So you lose your entitlement, right? That's the wonderful gift from the Republicans. They say it's going to go bankrupt, so we're going to destroy it first. Voucher. And the voucher means that the risk goes to you, right? If you run out of money, you're simply dead. Medicaid is block granted. It is savagely cut. We went through with this. Through this last week, and it's block granted. So it's given over to the states. It's a massive cash, a certain amount of cash. And then along come Christie and Kasich and Jerry Brown, of course. He's worried about global warming or whatever it is, right? Any governor, fascist, reactionary, whatever, social traitor, like some of the Democrats, they come along and they can use that for what they want, and you are left holding the bag. So, once again, it's Medicare voucherized, food stamps and Medicaid farmed out to the states in the form of block grants. Now, that's only the beginning of this saga of death and destruction from Congressman Price of Georgia. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. It's the program we're recording here on the 27th of March. Let me just remind you, if you want to come out and break a lance in support of Reverend Pinckney, boycotting Whirlpool, this coming Saturday, by the time you hear this, it will be underway. It's at PC Richards, that's the appliance store, 120 East 14th Street. Hey, down on 14th Street near Union Square. I think it starts between 1 and 2. Anyway, you won't hear this before 2. So if you hear this and you want to go over there, hop on the subway and go. Food stamps are passed out as block grants, subject to cuts by fascist governors. Imagine what's going to happen. Medicare, voucherized. Medicaid, block granted, savagely cut. That undoubtedly includes S-CHIP, right? The child health insurance program that's built into that. Why do this? The Republicans, in their ideological insanity and full fury, believe in the balanced budget. And they say, well, there's a danger in the future that we're going to have some kind of a problem with the budget. So what we've got to do is absorb every possible negative consequence today. Massive disinvestment in education, health, the middle class, and everything else, right? The question is often, are they on the Chinese payroll? Are these Republicans getting money from Beijing to destroy the United States and deliver total world domination to the Chinese? Well, if they were, and some of them, I believe some of them are, and we don't know because of Scalia over there and Citizens United, we just don't know. But this is exactly what they would be doing. Now, their goal is to reach balance. They'll never do it. We've explained why. It just won't work that way. The more you cut, the bigger the deficit will be because the overall level of economic activity will decline, dependent as it is from on government spending in a depression, which is where we are. They say they want to cut $5.5 trillion out of the federal budget over a period of 9 years. And they're going to go to vouchers for Medicare in the 8th year. I guess they've been burned enough, so they take the sort of slow and circumnavigation approach. The caps, the sequester caps, the limits on the various categories of spending stay in place. Yes, they keep them. The Satan sandwich of August 2011, Obama's absolute folly, but he accepted it. He actually proposed it under duress, right, with a gun in his back, trying to avoid default and breakdown crisis. So the caps stay. In order, however, to increase military spending, despite keeping the caps, these clever Republicans have come up with a $40 billion war account that's not subject to sequestration. So that can come in there. Now, they claim to get to balance at the end of the process. The cuts, the Republicans claim that they're cutting $5.5 trillion over the decade, $550 billion a year, $500 billion plus per year. The Congressional Budget Office says the House actually cuts $5.3 trillion and the Senate cuts $4.9 trillion. Now, of course, the Washington Post and the other austerity ghoul news organs are saying, yes, but we've got to increase taxes and, above all, cut entitlements. That's what they want. The Republicans say that this budget of theirs is best taken together with a simplified tax code. Let's make it simple. Let's simply lower the top rate on the fat cats, the predators, the hedge fund hyenas, and so forth. Just lower that top rate. No problem. Now, in the Senate, it was 52 to 46. A couple of very important points. The earned income tax credit and the child tax credit disappear. They're gone as of October 1st of this year, because we're talking about the FY fiscal year 2016 budget. Earned income tax credit and child tax credit are for the poor, for lower income groups, right? It's a way to get a little bit of money back based on working but being poor, or having a child and being poor. This means the combination is that 16 million Americans, 16 million, will either go into poverty or they'll be pushed into poverty of this group, 8 million children, 8 million children go into poverty because of the lack of the earned income tax credit and or the child tax credit. But of course, it's all in a good cause. What's the cause? To repeal the estate tax. Repeal it. The oligarch tax, the plutocrat tax, what they call the death tax. It's Franklin D. Roosevelt's attempt to claw back some of the ill-gotten gains from the predators and parasites of the financial ruling class of the 1930s. Well, now it's going to disappear. Now, exactly who is this? In order to be subject to the federal real estate tax at the present time, you have to be at an estate of $5.5 million per couple. This applies to about 3,700 estates per year. So look at that trade-off. 8 million kids, 16 million total Americans go into poverty, or deeper if they're in it already, so that these 3,700 parasites, fat cats, and predators can project their money down to their imbecilic offspring. The Export-Import Bank, we're not sure, but it looks bad. Remember Jim Jordan, Republican of Ohio, and his kamikaze caucus, calling it the Freedom Caucus, they're trying to wipe this out. How about this? Cutting Pell Grants. This is now 9 million poor students. About 2/3 of all black students get these Pell Grants. Half of all Latino students get these Pell Grants. It's a grant of about $5,775 per year, and it costs $34 billion to keep these 9 million kids in college. This is something that Obama actually doubled. This is one of the unsung minor good deeds of Obama, but now they want to cut it. And it's not exactly clear how, but the answer is savagely. By the way, when they cut food stamps, they're also cutting Head Start, breakfast for kids, and WIC. See you in a minute. All right, we've been looking at the monstrosities of the Republican budget. Let's get some more. They want to privatize the air traffic controllers. Can you believe that? They want to downsize the Federal Aeronautics Administration and privatize the air traffic controllers. And the issue is something called Next Gen. It's a $40 billion investment. Some of it is borne by the airlines, but somehow it's for this guy John Micah, Republican of Florida, reactionary. He wants to farm this out. He's probably got some rich friend who wants to buy it and loot it and asset strip it and then throw it back on the junk heap, and the federal government can pick up the wreckage. That's the way it usually works. There's also the question of the Highway Trust Fund, which has now run out of money again, and it's got to be renewed by about the end of May. So May 31st, that will come up again. Now, the Republican budget also contains $1 trillion of unspecified cuts. They've got a scalpel. They've got a hatchet. They've got a saber and a lance, but they're not going to tell you exactly who's going to get hit. This is the so-called magic asterisk, right? They'll say, this doesn't look like it balances, but we are going to balance it because we're going to have $1 trillion in unspecified cuts. There's also some action going on around payday lenders, loan sharks, absolute rip-off operations, right, and how they prey on working families who can't make ends meet, and then they get into a descending spiral of usury and slavery. Well, the answer to that, of course, is to reintroduce usury laws as we had them in the pre-Volcker era. 10% was the top interest rate you could charge on any loan, and that we would be very well advised to go back to it. So I think we've touched on at least some of the lowlights of this monstrosity. If this goes through, not only does it strip you of your Medicare entitlement, it brings non-military spending to the lowest rates since the Eisenhower administration. January 1961 is the term of reference. So that's the situation there. Now let's look at what else happened here. We'll see some of these Republican presidential candidates. Rubio said, let's increase military spending, but let's not pay for it. Let's just add that to the deficit. This was defeated 32-68. Then along comes Little Rand Paul, not to be outdone. Little Rand says, let's increase military spending. Let's give more to the Pentagon. My God, all you dupes out there, you thought you believed in Little Rand? He's a militarist. He's trying to find ways to have the Pentagon spend more, not less. This is the reality of libertarianism. Complete fraud. So he says the Pentagon should get more money. How would you get the money? Cut foreign aid. Now, we don't know the details, but is he saying to cut U.S. food aid, food for peace? Remember, the U.S. provides approximately, more than half, 60%, I believe, of all food aid in the world comes from Uncle Sam, and it's something to be proud of. It saves many lives, whatever else it does. No, says Little Rand, we want to cut it. That went down 96-4. Here we have a traitor Democrat, Senator Kaine of Virginia. He says increase the Pentagon spending, but pay for it via entitlement cuts. Except for Social Security, but Medicare is included. Okay. Bernie Sanders says that the Republicans are not asking even a penny from any fat cat to pay for the budget deficit. Of course not. He wants money for climate change. That's his story. Senator Murray, came out and said it's time to end these sequestration caps. And that was rejected on a party line vote. We have to remember that the Murray-Ryan compromise of 2014 and 2015 is now expired. So we're going into another sickening downturn of austerity. So what you notice is that the media are trying to hide how shocking, how fascist, how barbaric, how savage these cuts are. It's unbelievable. Has there been a fascist invasion overnight? Has some horrendous, foreign power taken over the United States? This is the question. Now, the New York Times article says, don't worry, it doesn't matter. Just doesn't matter. NPR, pretty much the same story. Nothing to worry about. Oh, they're just popping off, just a little ideology here in the springtime, and so forth, right? So that's absolute baloney. You're seeing the fascistization of the society, and the media are lulling you into a Pollyanna dream that there's nothing to worry about. And indeed, there's plenty to worry about. The general idea, as I said, is $550 billion cut every year. 2/3 of it, and this is from an interesting. There's some documentation here. The Center on Budget and Policy Priorities shows you that 2/3 of the cuts come from low-income programs, Medicaid, any kind of health, including Medicare, S-chip, SNAP, food stamps, and Pell Grants. So they're all being cut. And then the problem, of course, is if you're going to raise military spending, then you've got to do more cutting and therefore more killing. So this is now our situation. So I urge everybody, you have got to scream bloody murder about this. You have got to call people's attention to it. Don't believe the New York Times. Don't believe National Public Radio. Don't believe the media in general that are telling you, well, it's just authorization. It's not really appropriation. And a lot of it is in the future. So all disinvestment, and of course, as anybody can point out, if you look at what you ought to be doing to develop a labor force, to try to get a certain degree of upward social mobility restored, if you want to compete with China, you'd be doing the opposite of all these things. And again, it's like saying the rich are not rich enough. The privileges of the rich have been sadly neglected. We need another round of privileges. And just think about this idea that the estate tax is repealed for fat cats, and the earned income tax credit and the child tax credit, some of the most successful programs in a very limited sense, of course, but those are the ones. There's also, let me not forget, if you want to get a Pell Grant and go to college, and that's the future for everybody, they're going to make it harder to get. In other words, you're going to have to be more needy, because the Republican ideologues are out there saying, well, of course, these Pell Grants are now going into the hands of the rather well-off middle class, and we don't want that to happen. Now, we've just had the formal opening of Budget Week here in the nation's capital, and the results are absolutely appalling. We've had the fascist Republican budget from the House of Representatives, and I say fascist with studied care. These are not gratuitous insults. These are scientific terms of description, taxonomy, classifications. Earlier in the week, we had the House of Representatives pass a budget monstrosity by 228 to 199. And then after that, we've just had the Senate passed by the tools and minions of the Koch brothers. And the scoring on this budget, if the Congressional Budget Office, CBO, is going to come and do scoring, they better do the scoring in megadeaths. You will recall the ingenious movie Dr. Strangelove by Stanley Kubrick and a great cast in 1964, right after the Cuban Missile Crisis, when people were thinking about this. And you remember that famous scene in the war room of the Pentagon where General Buck Turgidson of the Air Force, who is an advocate of preemptive nuclear war, has a notebook in his lap, or a loose leaf book, that says world targets in megadeaths. And I would suspect that from now on you're going to have Republican congressional aides, and indeed senators and congressmen, come forward carrying similar loose leaf notebooks. Budget parameters in megadeaths. It is the only way to put it. We've been studying the bloody butcher's bill of the Republican hegemony here for the last several weeks. You remember it's 17,000 dead or dying as a result of the refusal of 36 reactionary Republican states to even provide this minimal Obamacare, right? A token plan, but at least something. 17,000 dead there. And now if the Supremes, with the fascist Justice Scalia, impeach Scalia, of course, it's another 10,000. So you're up to about 27,000. But now all of that has now been far exceeded. Here's what we look at now. With some of this we reported last week, but let's give it a summation here. First of all, on food stamps, perhaps the most important of these entitlements in in terms of immediate life or death impact, right? You got 50 million people, or almost 50 million people, who've got to have dinner tonight. They got to have breakfast tomorrow morning, and on and on. They've actually got to have a similar budget, not identical, but similar and converging in the same direction. That was done late in the evening, late at night, actually, between Friday and between Thursday and Friday. So with the 26th to the 27th of March. There's only one way to put it. The Republicans who voted for these measures are fascists, and they are savages. Maybe we can call them fascist savages. Their budgets are no budgets. They are manifestos of murder. They are, in a very real sense, a ticket to a civil war, to the breakdown of civilization as we've known it. This is class war,